Okay, we're in John chapter 9 this morning. I don't know about you, but when we sing songs, they bring up memories from your life. And I recall, well, first of all, we sang "There's Power in the Blood," which thank you for that. So your requests, if you make them known, they'll show up however you do that. Secondly, as we were singing "There's Power in the Blood," I remember I had a neighbor across the street from me when I was a kid. His name was Brian. And I invited him to church once, and he came to church, which was great. And we sang a lot of songs about the blood. And so when we were leaving, he was kind of like, "You guys sing a lot of songs about blood." And I was like, "It's because it's important. I mean, without the blood of Christ, there's no resurrection. Without the finished work of Christ, which includes the blood, there is no resurrection because, as Hebrews talks about, we need the blood." Anyway, so I was just thinking about that as we were singing, and is good. So I appreciate the songs that we sang tonight, and so I'm very excited about those, and I really enjoyed singing those songs as we went. As we've been working our way through the Gospel of John, we have been looking back over the last several chapters at the Feast of Tabernacles, and chapter 9 is loosely attached to that, but really is setting the stage for what we're going to see in John chapter 10, which is the difference between good and bad shepherds. And then dealing specifically in John chapter 9, though, with those that see and those that don't see. And so John chapter 9, we're going to try to take the whole chapter 9, and we've gone through this together before because it's one of my favorite chapters in the Gospel of John. But since we're going through the book of John, I'm not going to skip over it since we've covered it before. We're just going to work our way through it and make some observations as we go. One of the things that we have seen previously in the Gospel of John, specifically in the Feast of Tabernacles, is that Jesus says Jesus says about himself that he is the light of the world. And as we go through John chapter 9, this kind of builds on that discussion about Jesus being the light that's coming into the world, specifically as he opens the eyes of a blind man, and you have those that are in darkness versus those that are light, those that can see versus those that cannot see. And so let's look at John chapter 9 together. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parent, that he was born blind?" And again, this was a commonly held notion in the time of Jesus and even before, that if you sin, your children may bear the penalty for that. And they would even had a view that a child could sin in the womb, or in the womb can suffer the effects of the mother's sin and therefore be born blind. There was one opinion that if a woman was pregnant and she went and worshipped at a pagan temple, that could cause problems with the child. And so the question is, did the child sin in the womb, or was there sin coming into life, or was it his parent's sin that caused this person to be born blind? And again, that's going to be very crucial here, the fact that he is born blind. And so Jesus' response here in verse 3 is something they would not have expected. He says, "Neither this man nor his parents sin, but that the works of God should be revealed in him." So his basic statement is, there's no sin issue here. His parents are not at fault, nor is he at fault, but God had him born blind for a specific reason, and it's so that God can manifest the grace of Jesus in his life. He's going to display something amazing in and through him. Now, someone would say, well, that's not really fair to the man, is it? I think if you were to ask the man at the end of this chapter if it was fair or not, he would have said, "I would have done it again." Because he came face to face with Jesus and understood what that meant. So those that would say, well, we have an issue with God being unfair to this person, I don't, and again, I can't speak for him, but I would assume from the way that he responded to Jesus, he would happily do it all over again. Verse 4, "I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Again, reminding us what we had saw previously in his statement in the Feast of Tabernacles, that he is the light of the world. And in verse 4, the idea there is that while he is in the world, he is working. The idea of the daytime is his time to work. Notice also that the verse 4 here he says, "I must work the works of him who sent me." You're going to keep "sent me" and put that in your back pocket, and we'll come back to it here in a little bit because there's some play on words that we're going to see as we go forward. Okay? And so here he is reminding them that while he is in the world, he is always working because the Father has work for him to do. 6, when he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the man who was, if I could read, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. I hope my reading difficulties help you feel better about yourself, but sometimes it's just hard, it's okay. Opinions are diverse on why Jesus does this. We know from Scripture that Jesus can heal without even being present, correct? We know that Jesus can merely, the woman with the issue of blood touches the hem of his garment and she is healed. People come to Jesus, say, so-and-so is sick, can you come and heal him? And he doesn't even need to go, he just heals, right? So Jesus does this for a particular reason. And there are 2 particular reasons that stand out amongst the variety of reasons as to why would Jesus do this. The first one is this is a form of kind of recreation or creation. As you think back to the creation account in Genesis, that God forms man out of the dust of the ground, so perhaps in a sense, since his eyes never worked, he is creating eyes that work and putting them there. Perhaps. A second opinion is that one of the prohibitions from the oral law, not the written law, is that kneading, which he would have had to do to make the clay, he spits on the ground, he takes it, he rubs it all together, was prohibited on a certain day of the week, which we're going to find out later in verse 14, that it's the Sabbath. A third-ish one that I don't think has as much weight as the first 2 is that there is some, I want to say old wives' tales about views on saliva, and that saliva was a bodily excretion, so it would make you unclean. And so Jesus is, but depending on who you are, you could take the unclean and make it clean. It's really kind of convoluted to follow that argument, and I'm not that smart to follow it all the way, but it just doesn't seem to hold as much water as the first 2. Of the first 2, whether he is recreating or showing his power in creation, or if he is showing the fact that he is Lord of the Sabbath and the fact that he can knead and do what he wants to do on the Sabbath, I think the second is probably preferable to the first, but I won't fight you if you hold the first. Okay, we can still be friends and hold one of those 2 opinions. Either way, I think he does it specifically to create some level of friction between himself and the Pharisees and the religious elite, because that's what we're looking at in the last several chapters in John, is this rising friction between the Jewish establishment and the religious leaders and Jesus, who is demonstrating that he is Lord. Because remember, he had just said in the end of chapter 8, before Abraham was, I am. And they were about to stone him, but he eluded them. Okay? That was in verse 58 of chapter 8. So either way, whether you hold that this is an instance of some sort of identifying himself as creator, or you hold that he is demonstrating he is Lord of the Sabbath. Because remember, the Sabbath regulations are fairly loose in the Old Testament, but very rigid with the oral tradition that's passed down. All the way down to, the one that I always like to point out is if there's a deer in your house, one of you can't block it, but 2 of you can. Things of that nature from the Mishnah, and I believe it's the Shabbat, if you look at some of those things. Either way, he does this, he puts the clay in the man's eyes. Now, you'll notice also in verse 6, Jesus takes the initiative. Nobody brings the man to Jesus, they just happen to be walking by. Again, I use happen in the sense of air quotes. They just happen to be walking by. The disciples happen to take notice of this man, and Jesus stops. Jesus is, again, you'll notice all the way through this chapter, Jesus is the one taking the initiative as it relates to his relationship to this individual, because at the end of the chapter, Jesus will seek him out. So he does this for the man. Verse 7, he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is being translated what? Sent. So you have the one who is sent, sending a man to wash in the pool of Siloam, which is called sent. It's an interesting play on words there as John is constructing the narrative as we follow Jesus. So the sent one is sending one to wash in the pool called sent. The end of verse 7. So he went, he was sent, and he washed, and he came back seeing. So again, Here you have Jesus doing something spectacular for this man. He comes back, verse 8, therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is this not the one who begged? Remember, if you're blind, your options for income are fairly limited. Okay? There's no welfare, there's no Americans with Disability Act. None of those things are there for somebody to have something for you to do, and if you have an impairment or limitation, to meet that need. When I went back to work at the last election a couple months ago, I don't know, was it a couple months ago? It's August. No, it's the beginning of this month. Man, time flies, right? I tell you, I have no sense of time or space or distance. When I went back there, I had to go back through a mini orientation. So they would ask you, is there any accommodations that you need to be able to work? You know, other than I'm not that bright, none. I think other than that, I'm okay. Here, his options are, his family provides for him if they have the means and he doesn't need to do anything, or B, he's got to beg for a living. And that was one of the things that the Israelites were encouraged to do, was to take care of those who were less fortunate, the sojourner, the widow, the orphan, and those who had problems. And that's why you see in the story of Lazarus and the rich man, Lazarus at the rich man's gate, because society would say, if you have means and ability, you should help those who can't help themselves. So they come back and they say, well, it looks like him. And we don't know what his name is, so when I teach this, I always like to kind of give him a name like Steve or Bob or Bill or Jimmy, whichever. It looks like Bill, but some says this is he, and others said it's like him. He said, maybe it's not. They can't tell. There begins to be this discussion, and you have him kind of waving his hand. It's me. I've known you forever. I didn't know what you look like, but I know what you sound like, and you know what I look like, and you know what I sound like. And again, when we talk about John chapter 9, I would love to see the look on his face as he begins to look around and see what things are that he's felt before. Like, he's felt a house, I'm sure, but he's never seen what a house looks like. He's felt the door, but he doesn't know what a door looks like. He's felt his mother's face, but he has no idea what she looks like or what that means. So it would be very interesting to see him as he is walking around and his eyes work, and now his eyes are beginning to put together with his brain all the things that he has smelled and tasted and and felt, all those things. It would be amazing. And now they're sitting here trying to decide if he is who he says he is, and he's like, it's me. What do I need to do? I give you a blood sample, but we don't have DNA testing yet. So verse 10, therefore they said to him, how do you see? How is this possible? Have you seen the videos on YouTube of colorblind people who are given those glasses that they can now see colors, and everybody's crying and they can see color, and they're like, you get to see this every day? Okay, this is more significant than that. I don't mean to rain on anybody who's colorblind's parade, but this person couldn't see at all. He was born blind, never once saw in his life, and now here he is seeing. And this is a reasonable, legitimate question. How'd that happen? So verse 11, he answered. Now remember, the key to this, one of the keys to this passage is following his journey and his understanding of who Christ is. Because his first response to somebody who asked him, a man, verse 11, called Jesus, made clay, and anointed my eyes, and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went, and I washed, and now I can see. Then they said to him, where is he? And he said, I have no idea. Now, again, the comparison that I always make here is with John chapter 5, with the other man who is healed. The man who's laying there at the pool, waiting for the water to be stirred so he can get in, and Jesus says, do you want to be healed? And he's kind of, I think, a little crotchety. Of course I want to be healed. Why do you think I'm here? And Jesus says to him? Rise up, take up your mat and walk, and he does. And then he gets questioned by the religious leaders, and they're like, and as soon as he finds out who it was, because he didn't know it was Jesus at the time, he throws Jesus under the bus to avoid any kind of issue, because remember, that healing also happened on the Sabbath. So here, I don't know where he is, but I know it was Jesus. And he says, man called Jesus. 13, they brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. I don't think they do this because they want to get him in trouble. I think they do this because the Pharisees know the law, because most scribes are Pharisees, but not all scribes are Pharisees at this time. Now, post the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, almost all scribes are Pharisees, because the Sadducees basically ceased to exist, because most of the Sadducees, by and large, were priests, and with the destruction of the temple, the priests really have no function and have no standing anymore, and so Judaism really begins to follow the Pharisees by and large. Okay? So they bring them to the people who would know the law best and really have a way to answer the questions that they have. How is this possible? What does it mean? Okay? So it's not a negative thing. So they bring him to the Pharisees, who are probably going to be in the synagogue. And now it was the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And this is the one time I really need an organist to play the bum, 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 that you would get in those old movies about, here's the twist. Here's the crazy thing that happened. It's the Sabbath. Because remember, you do something wrong on the Sabbath and the Pharisees are going to get you. You ever grow up with that one person who was in school, if you ever did anything wrong, they were going to sell you out to the teacher? They were going to get you? Okay? That was the Pharisees. Now, again, I don't want to speak too harshly against them, because all these extra rules they put around the law, I think they did so with a good intention. That is, if I don't break this law, then I won't break the law. And so you can understand why you would do that. I mean, I think Dan Seeley, it was probably 8 years ago, really explained that really well one time when he was here, about the idea of them putting a hedge around the law so they wouldn't break the law. But the problem becomes when you worship the hedge instead of the law, you got problems, right? Okay? Either way, verse 14, it was the Sabbath when he made the clay. And I think that's why the clay thing is a Sabbath thing more than it is a recreation thing, because it's Jesus doing more than just healing on the Sabbath. He is breaking that hedge of kneading, K-N-E-E-D-I-N-G, not N-E-E-D-I-N-G. Okay? So the Pharisees asked him again how he received his sight. And he said to them, He said to them, he put clay on my eyes and I wash and I see. You've got to appreciate the consistency of his story. Because when you tell the truth, your story is usually fairly consistent, right? Unless you get tripped up because you forgot something and you add it in later. But usually, and you see this, I think, if you watch those police or detective shows, if somebody's lying, they keep asking the same question. Eventually they trip up and they say the wrong thing because their lie falls apart. Here, he's just consistent with what happened. I was sitting there. This guy comes by. He makes spit on the ground, which was probably kind of gross. He puts it on his eyes. He says, go wash. He goes and washes, and now I see. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Simple story. But so incredibly profound, right? 16. Therefore, some of the Pharisees said, this man, speaking of Jesus, is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Okay, so you have the one side. He touched the hedge. So he's got to be wrong. The other side, in verse 16, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there's division among them. And if you think about it, as you look back through the Gospels, there is often this internal division amongst the Pharisees. It's more, I would say, if I had to put a number on it, 3/4 against and 1/4 for, because you have Nicodemus who stands up for Jesus earlier. And you'll have in the book of Acts, Gamaliel who will stand up and say, guys, if this is of God, you can't stop it. If it's not, it'll fizzle out. So there's always this internal strife within the group. And that's just by nature any group. If you have any group of people and you put them together, usually you're going to have a differing of opinion on some level. That's why when people say, I want to bring your kids something, I say, bring 5 of the same thing. Don't give me 4 of one and 1 of another, because it's just going to cause a fight. I do that lightheartedly, but you understand, right? Okay. So there's division. And you understand both sides a little bit. The one side said he's broken our oral tradition. Okay? That was very highly valued all the way from the patriarch, not the patriarchs, the kind of Moses and down, that oral tradition they had built around the Torah. But then the others are saying, you can't discount what he's done. Now, some could say the flaw in that argument is that other people have done miracles that weren't God's people. You think back to Pharaoh and Moses. What did Moses do? He threw down the serpent, and what did Pharaoh's magicians do? He threw down the rod, which became a serpent. There he goes. Same thing. But that only goes so far. But nobody, as we'll see at the end here, nobody's ever done a miracle like this. Verse 17. So because they can't decide amongst themselves, they appeal back to this man to say, well, we can't solve it ourselves, so you help us solve it. So they said to the blind man again, what do you say about him? Because he opened your eyes. He said, he is a prophet. Okay, so you remember back earlier in verse 11, a man called Jesus made clay. Now in verse 17, he's got to be at least a prophet. Because we've seen the prophets in the Old Testament do miracles, right? We've seen miracles worked through these men of God before. And so at this point, again, his education level probably wouldn't be great because he was blind and he was a beggar. So I don't know what his education level would have been, but he at least acknowledges that he has got to be a sent one from God at some level, right? And this is exactly what Nicodemus says too, right? In John chapter 3. We know that you are sent from God because no one could work the works that you work unless they're sent from God. That's Tim's paraphrase at the beginning of John chapter 3, Nicodemus and Jesus. 18. They didn't like that answer, right? The friction between them and Jesus dictates that they don't like that answer. They wanted him to say something else. 18. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called his parents to ask him if he had received his sight. Again, here's an ad hominem attack. If I can undercut the messenger, I can undercut the message, right? So we're going to put aside who Jesus is for a minute and say, and make sure that you really were born blind, because if this is all kind of a big show, then we don't need to deal with the issue at hand. So verse 19, they bring his parents in and they asked him saying, is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he see? Same question, different people. You say he was born blind. You tell us how he can see. 20, his parents answered and said, we know this is our son and that he was born blind. Okay? We can affirm that. And here are two witnesses who can verify in the law that this is true. The end of verse 21. Verse 20. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself. I have a hard time with this verse. I understand this verse. But you see them distancing themselves from their son. The son who was born blind, whom they held as a child. Now they're saying, we don't want part of this. He is over 13. He can handle it. Don't bring us into it. That, man, as a parent, my kids asked me today at lunch. I like to throw my kids under the bus since they're here, and these people threw their kids under the bus, so might as well throw my kids under the bus. They asked me at lunch, Daddy, if we had a sixth kid, would you love it? Because they know that 5 is great. Some people have 1 child and that's great. Some people have 3 children and that's great. Some people have 12 children and that's great. 5 for me is good. Okay? And so they said, would you love a 6th child? I think they questioned me there a little bit. And I said, of course I would. It might take me a while to wrap my head around having a 6th child, but I absolutely would love this child. And so then you think about, you go back here to John chapter 9, man, that relationship, icy a little bit. For them, you talk to him. Leave us out of it. He's old enough to handle this on his own. You see the answer why in verse 22. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, they would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, he is of age, ask him. The parents chose everybody else over their son. Wow. Let that sink in for a second. But on the other side of this, as you think about what's happening in this story, and especially as you're looking forward to John chapter 10, the Good Shepherd, you have Jesus who is actively seeking this man out. Remember how the chapter starts. They just happen to be walking by. His disciples happen to ask him a question. Jesus says, he is here for this moment, and I'm going to heal him. Okay? So his parents remove themselves because they don't want to be put out of the synagogue. Being put out of the synagogue would mean that they are basically ostracized from the society. Some commentators say maybe that synagogue, maybe not the entirety of the synagogues in and around the nation. Either way, they don't want to go through whatever that means. They're at least out of that. And it's not like today where if you and I got in an argument You know, if I got Les really mad today, maybe he'd say, well, I'm just going to move on down the road to the other church, and that's fine. You know, that's how we do it in America, isn't it? But here the community is much tighter in the synagogue area, and to be put out of that, the shame involved is huge. Remember, it's a shame culture. We don't have a shame culture. Sometimes people shame us and we wear it as a badge of honor. Oh yeah, only go on Facebook and tell the world about you. 23. He's of age, ask him. They remove themselves from the discussion. So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, give God the glory. Now, if we just pause there, you go back to Joshua chapter 7, when you have the sin of Achan, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. They finally come to Achan as they draw lots. Remember that? They draw the lot for this tribe, and then they finally come down to Achan, his household. Joshua says to Achan, give God the glory, which is basically saying, fess up. Tell the truth. It's not like you're praising the Lord, you know, holy hands of worship here. This is you need to tell me the truth right now. We know that this man is a sinner. Okay, so they've already made up their mind about Jesus, right? The Pharisees have. He answered and said, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. Then they asked him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I already told you, and you did not listen. I think this guy's getting a little snippy. Because remember, the tables are starting to turn. The one who is on trial is now becoming, in a sense, the teacher. Because these are the guys that should have the answers, right? We brought this guy to you because he was born blind. We don't know how. We need answers to wrap our minds around what's happening here. Help us understand this. And they can't. And so things are starting to get a little tense. I told you already, verse 27, you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? I mean, ouch. Just kind of get it in there a little bit. I would imagine that, I don't think that we know how long he's been blind, but he's been on the streets a little bit. You ever deal with people that have been on the streets a little bit? They've got thick skin, and they know how to give as good as they get, usually. That's been my experience, okay? Not that I've been on the street, but dealing with people, okay? I don't have that thick of a skin, and I'm not that great at those things. But either way, he can feel the heat coming on, and so he's going to give as good as he gets. I've been telling you repeatedly exactly what happened. My story hasn't changed. I was born blind. Guy comes by. I go to the pool. After he puts clay in my eyes, I come back seeing. You explain it, and you can't. And so now you want to throw me under the bus. Man. 28. Then they reviled him and said, you are his disciple. But we are, and you can almost see them kind of cock their nose up a little bit and look down there. You are his disciple, the sinner's disciple. We are the disciples of Moses. We went to Harvard. You have a GED. You know, I'm trying to figure out a way to really to wrap that. You dropped out. Okay? I have an Ivy League diploma. I have an MBA. We are Moses' disciples. Remember, when you think about prophets, when you think about people who loom large in the scriptures, for the Jews, really nobody looms much larger than Moses. He is on the Mount Rushmore of the Jews. You get Abraham, Moses, you could throw Elijah on there, and probably David. Those would probably be your big four. We could argue a little bit about it, but Moses would definitely be on there. And so I'm appealing to him. You can't top Moses. He is the prophet. 29. And again, when you have, it's interesting as I know I said a verse and I backed off, I apologize. It's interesting how when you have an argument, when you don't have a reasonable, logical explanation, what do they usually kind of boil down to? Just yelling. And that's what you see in the world today in all of these riots. People don't have a real logical reason for things, so when you try to present them with logic, they just start yelling. And that's kind of if I can yell louder than you, then I win the discussion. And that's not a real logical, biblical discussion. 29. Moses is great, and here's why Moses is great. And I'm not discounting Moses, but in their mindset, this is why Moses is great. We know that God spoke to Moses, okay? Absolutely. Exodus 33 and elsewhere. Moses enjoyed a relationship with God unlike anybody else. He met with God face to face as God meets with a friend. We talked about that not too long ago, right? The relationship that God had with Moses, amazing. And not because Moses deserved it, by the way, right? Because God chose him, God equipped him, and God decided to do things through Moses. As for this fellow, we don't even know where he's from. Now, if you remember, not too long ago, I believe it's at the end of chapter 7, they begin to make fun of Nicodemus in verse 50 and following, as Nicodemus stands up for him. In verse 50, Nicodemus says of chapter 7, he who came to Jesus by night, being one of them, said to them, does our law judge a man before it hears him and knows what he is doing? They answered and said to him, are you also from Galilee? Search and look, for no prophet has ever arisen from Galilee. So, in one sense, they do know where he's from, but in another sense, Jesus has also reminded them, you don't really know where I'm from, speaking of the fact that he's from the Father. And so already their logic is all over the place. We don't even know where he's from. Verse 30, the man answered and said to them, why, this is a marvelous thing, that you don't know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes. So it's almost as though he's saying, so it'd be like if you knew a reporter and there was this big obvious story out there and they didn't know anything about it. Well, you're a reporter. How don't you know about that? You know? How is it that you, who are the guardians of orthodoxy, can't explain to me how this man does such great miracles? 2 + 2 is orange to them, apparently. I don't understand it. That's probably Common Core math anyways. I had to get that one in there, I'm sorry. Kristen understands my pain. The first time I substitute taught, I had to teach Common Core math to like third graders. I had to relearn math to figure it out so I could teach it to them. I didn't understand it. I'm like, how does this even work? I got to stop. Sorry. Where am I at? Verse 30. With heavy sarcasm, I think. Verse 31, now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Again, he is just applying logic to the situation. I was blind. I was healed. God doesn't listen to sinners. Obviously, then, if you follow the Venn diagram or however that logical soliloquy or syllogism works, this is how it works. One of those words is right, okay? He must be from God because only somebody from God could do this. And my eyes work. You know? I had to go renew my driver's license, and I was pretty excited because I was hoping she'd have me read off the chart that I was looking at because I could get pretty close to the bottom, and I was going to be pretty proud of myself. But then she had me look at something else, and I was like, oh, okay, that's not quite as cool. I wanted to show my eagle eyes off. This man's like, my eyes are proof that something amazing has happened, and you're discounting it. 32, since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. But if you look back in Isaiah and elsewhere, one of the things that the Messiah will do is open the eyes of those who are blind. There are clear messianic references to what Jesus is doing right here. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Now, just pause there for a second before we get to verse 34, because we know what's going to happen. But his parents removed themselves from any hint of danger, right? He's our son. As far as what happened, talk to him. Here, this man is just like, he is just getting after it with honest reasons. Listen, you guys, this happened. I'm not going to discount it. I can't discount it because it did happen. I've got to be honest about it. It didn't fit their paradigm for what they wanted to be true, but it fit what is true. And so he's just like, that's what it is. I'm not going to throw this man under the bus. 33, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered and said to him, you were completely born in sins, meaning you were born blind. So they go back to verse 1 and 2 of John chapter 9, the same thought process of the disciples. Somebody sinned. It was probably either him or his parents. So they admit at this point that he was blind. You were born in sins, and you are teaching us? How dare you? The gall of some... Harvard. Not. You don't have the right to teach us anything. We sat at the feet of the great teachers, and we have all the degrees, and we dress the right way, and we cut our hair the right way, we read from the right translation, we listen to the right radio programs, on and on down the list. You are nothing but a dirty, rotten sinner. Ad hominem attack. I've undercut you, so I don't have to listen to the message. And they cast him out. The very thing that the parents did not want for themselves happened to their son. And they were happy to have it happen that way. 35. It's interesting the way that this narrative is set up because it's bracketed with Jesus on both sides, right? And the discussion in the middle is about Jesus, but both sides of this bracket are about Jesus and this man. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. He heard it. Word travels from the grapevine. How he heard, don't know. He just hears about it. And when he had found him, finding implies searching, correct? Again, this is helping to set up chapter 10, which is the Good Shepherd. When he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" Probably better translated Son of Man, depending on what translation you have there, okay? Clearly, this is messianic. The one who's coming into the world to save sinners, the one who's coming to fulfill the things the Old Testament prophesied about, the one through whom God is doing all these great things and has been promised, the one who would sit on the throne of David. All of those things are wrapped up into what Jesus is asking him. Jesus seeks him out, and he is continuing to move him in the right direction. Because remember, where did he start out? A man called Jesus. He's at least a prophet. He's at least righteous in some level because God hears him. And so now he says, let me help you take the last step and really move into true, genuine faith. Do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered, verse 36, "Who is he," probably better translated, "Sir, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, this is one of my favorite verses in this passage. Jesus says to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking to you." Because earlier in that day, Jesus couldn't have said, "You've seen him." But seeing is two-pronged here, right? It's not just you've seen him with your eyeballs, but as Jesus talks about light and darkness, in truth and out of truth, because we're going to talk about it here at the very end of the chapter, he sees with eyes of, you would say, faith and understanding. That's what he's talking about. Both are true here. But I love the fact that he's like, you've seen him, and you're looking at him. Beautiful. It is he who is talking with you. Then he said, rightly translated, "Lord, I believe," and he proskuneo, he worships him. That has the idea of prostrating yourself before him. Now, what a day for a guy, right? Think about it. I began the day begging, born blind, with no assumption that anything would be different about this day. Guy comes by, spits on the ground. I would like to have known how the conversation went between them about the fact that I just spit on the ground, Jesus, and I'm going to put it on your eyes. And you're going to go wash in the pool of Siloam, and it's going to be great. And then he's like, okay, I got nothing else on my calendar today. I can't see the calendar, so I don't know what's on it, so I'm just going to go with it. And then you go through his parents disown him in a sense. The Pharisees, the people he would have trusted to teach him truth, reject him. But that guy who he met early in the morning or whenever comes and finds him after he's been thrown out, and he says, the person that you've been looking forward to your entire life is standing in front of you. Which is why I say, as he prostrates himself in verse 38, is this wrong of God to do? This guy would say, I wouldn't have had it any other way. His blindness led to seeing. And not just seeing, because I can see color and things, but to seeing Christ. 39, Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind." Now, Jesus says this, I think, specifically because of verse 40, because wherever Jesus is, what's there? A crowd. And there's always some of the Pharisees and folks just following around, just eavesdropping on everything, because verses 35 through 38 are more of an intimate conversation. But sometimes people might have a conversation with people who are close, but they know people are listening, so they're going to say something else just for those people who are listening. You ever been part of that? It can be really awkward. So verse 39 is not necessarily directed at him in the fact he's in there. Those who were blind now see. Okay, and this is again talking about spiritual darkness moving to spiritual life. And so verse 40, then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said, "Oh, are you talking about us? Are we blind also?" And if Jesus was a sarcastic person, he probably would have said something like, "Ding, ding, ding." So Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see,' therefore your sin remains." The irony here is thick, because John loves irony. Because remember, how does John chapter 9 begin? Jesus who sinned, this person or his parents, so that he is blind. And at the end here, Jesus says, if you were blind, you would have no sin. The opposite is true, right? It's amazing how these roles are all reversed, because he's pointing out their complete lack of any understanding or discernment. And because they think they see, they don't. And we live in a world of people who think they see, but they don't. And we need the gospel to show us that we can't see so that we can come to spiritual life and discernment. Now, what is this passage all about? Several things I think stand out as to, because you've got to say, I mean, it's easy to pull out an interesting thought and say, this is a cool thing here, but you've got to think about this in the context of where we are and where we're going, right? Where we are is we've been through the Feast of Tabernacles. I am the light of the world. Jesus gives light to those who are in darkness. Yes, we're going towards I am the good shepherd also. But here in the middle, you have this question that has to be asked to people. And I think John writes this book to Jews who are in the diaspora after the fall of Jerusalem, probably. And they've got to deal with, what do I do with Jesus? And I think part of what John is doing here in John chapter 9 is saying, there has to be some level of courage to stand for what's right. And you have, in a sense, these three groups, you could almost say. You have the Pharisees who are saying, Jesus is wrong. Jesus is all bad. You have the parents of the blind man who are saying, I don't want to take sides. I don't want any part of this. And you have the man who has to make a decision. Will he be like his parents? And will he deny? Or will he stand for truth? I think that's really the thrust of what's happening between these three groups of people. What will you do with Jesus? The first group just rejects outright because they're the Pharisees, and they're just going to reject outright because he doesn't fit in their box. The second group says, "Nuh-uh, I'll be over here. You guys figure it out." And the man says, truth is truth. I have to stand for truth. And so we are, in a sense, put in the same position. I think we're put in that position daily as we interact with people around us. Will we stand for truth when people ask us about Jesus? When people ask us about, how could you believe that about what you believe? That doesn't fit with the narrative of the world. That that could be sin, or that this is the way you should do that. You have to say, Jesus said so, so I'm okay with that. That's going to be the truth that I stand for. Because what was the consequence for this man? The consequence are two. One is negative, one is positive. Because consequences can be positive, right? The negative consequence is he suffered shame in a shame culture, which was temporary. The positive consequence was that he met Jesus, which was eternally life-changing and completely worth it. All the people that sneered at him, ultimately God will deal with them. But he knows the great shepherd. And that's amazing. And so I would encourage us in a world that is increasingly crazy and increasingly says that wrong is right, and some of the things that people are trying to push for that are very wrong, they want to be made right, that you just kind of scratch your head and say, what? We stand for truth. regardless of what that consequence may be. Now, again, in Western world, those consequences are mostly, at best, we might lose a job. I don't know. It's not like you would find in other places like in China or in Africa where you really have your life on the line. But that doesn't mean that we don't stand courageously for what's true and what's right. And so John 9 really encourages us, regardless of the consequences, Christ is worth it. Father, we love you. We thank you for the opportunity this evening to look into this chapter. We thank you that this entire thing happened for God's glory and happened so that we, 2,000 years later, could learn more about who you are from it, to be encouraged by it, that we would take a stand for truth, regardless of the cost. The parents didn't want anything to do with what was going on, and they threw their son under the bus. But Jesus sought him out as the great shepherd seeks out his sheep. And so we thank you for that encouragement and that challenge, that even though we may suffer harm at the hands of people in this world, we have the great shepherd who cares for his sheep and the eternal glory that follows. Father, we love you and thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Let's take our hymnals and turn to hymn number 381. 381. Let's stand as we sing all three verses.